Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast sponsored by Jointflows. Today we're joined by Gerry Hill, the RVP EMEA at ConnectAndSell. How are you, Gerry?
Exceptionally well. Very good to be here as well. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. It's great to have you here. I always like to get a bit of background first to begin with so you can paint a bit of color in terms of who you are. So let our listeners know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So golf mad carnivore with a human child and two dogs. I used to play a bit of rugby for some money once upon a time and failed badly at that. So decided to get a job and it ended up in sales. And 21 years later, I'm still blogging stuff.
Yeah. Must enjoy it if you're still doing it.
Where did you play?
I played out in Wales on an academy contract whilst I was still at university, and then jobbed around like the championship, which is the level below the premiership in the UK, for about 10 years.
Nice.
Yeah, but my body gave up on me, and so did my soul, generally speaking. So needed to make money.
And your liver probably as well.
Well, there is that.
Yeah.
I look a lot older than I am.
Well, you've made Mick's day because now he's going to tell you how he's an Olympian as well. So you've got like,
there you go.
I'm not gonna get into that.
For another time, mate.
Yeah. Well, look, it's awesome to have you here, Gerry. You're a bit of a legend. So we're really glad to have you on the podcast. We usually start with one very simple question about the changes that you've spotted on the market related to sales and revenue execution. So what's coming across?
I think what I'm happy about is the fact that I think the fundamentals of being good at selling stuff is coming back into fashion. Now markets typically expose order takers versus sellers, which means that you need to have brilliant basics in order to do your job really well. I think I'm happy that companies are trying to drive revenue architecture, because that's just a very different way of thinking about sales and marketing alignment. And I like that trend to attract, acquire, win, grow, expand, and explode. And it's a lot more thoughtful. It's visually mapped out for people to understand reasonably well. I think I'm quite happy that email seems to be failing a little bit, although it's more for people's inbox sanity and buyer safety that I like that, rather than being dead against email as a channel. Again, I think it's helping with that brilliant basics. Everything that you can learn about being a good seller can happen to you in a cold call, and you can learn every skill you need from being able to manage and navigate cold conversations with people. Whereas I don't necessarily think the same is true with email. And then, yeah, I think companies are just being a lot more sort of focused on optimization as opposed to bloat, like just going out and funding 20 reps because that's what the coverage model tells you to do. But I think the fact that businesses are being a little bit more judicious around how to place their investment money is a lot better for everybody, generally speaking. Yeah. And I think the other sort of good consequence of a market shift is it really helps people determine if this is the thing that they're good at and they want to do, rather than just sort of riding on the coattails of the industry as it's in a bubble. So yeah, I think sentimentally there's a lot of stuff, but I also think the reality is even gifted sellers are finding this year hard. Tough terms, contract lengths, pilot schemes, buyer safety, de-risking. Like there's a huge amount of that stuff that normally wouldn't occupy their thinking, their tactics, their strategies, and having to readjust on that stuff isn't easy. People don't like to change too much, do they? So, I think you're sort of seeing a couple of conflicting forces that are ultimately going to be beneficial to everybody over time. But, it's paid to change, right? So,
yeah. And so how are you and your team adapting to those changes? So in particular, the last bit you spoke about, it's easy to be a good salesman in a bull market, right? When things are going well. But as you said, even like good AEs at the moment at times are struggling. So how are you guys adapting to this?
All of my enablement efforts at the moment are focused on cost of inaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Three years ago when I joined, up until about 9 months ago, it was still, we've got some incredible nitrous oxide for you guys. It'll help you go faster.
Yeah.
But actually, there's a commercial imperative, cost of inaction, your headcount's reduced, your pipeline coverage number hasn't gone away. How do I absolutely ensure that this is a safe investment? And that safety component is changing. So language that we're now using, things like an insurance policy, a wrap, underwrite your investment. Those are the kind of language terms that we're using. We've shifted the dynamics of some of our ROI value calc work into cost of inaction as opposed to showing upside. If you don't do this, this is the consequence. So worked a lot harder on that stuff for sure. I don't know if it's landing with everybody, but it won't land with everybody all of the time, right? There are people that are comfortable with certain things and people that aren't. But we're finding that we're taking people along with us. So that's what.
Yeah. I agree. I was on a podcast like a few weeks ago, and I was saying the same thing. I was saying I think the gap between good and bad sales executive salespeople will keep on increasing, and I think it's going to be more and more polarized. Why do you think moving away from like the risk is more attractive nowadays than moving towards the growth almost?
Growth has got a different lens though, hasn't it? Like, I think there are very few sort of heads of sales, VPs of sales who actually understand the role of their job particularly well. Like, they're motivational forces, they inspire action, they hold people accountable to numbers, they wrap tactics into somebody else's strategy. I think the one thing that they don't realize that their job is all about actually is deployment of somebody else's money to make an effective bet and get value back from the money that you spend. So if you make a decision to invest in Reach Desk and send a whole bunch of swag out to people, that's great, but what's the plan behind it? Or if you make a whole bunch of investments into headcount, what's the plan behind it? Right? Each and every single one of these actions that is at your disposal needs a consequence, and it needs to be much more better defined than it's ever been. CROs sort of understand that, but that next level or layer of management typically doesn't. So I think what we're trying to find in the world now are sort of more board conscious, shareholder value conscious first line managers or second line managers.
Yeah.
That's hard to get. I put out quite an interesting LinkedIn post the other day that didn't get anywhere near the traction I thought it should have, which was, I believe 90% of companies and sales enablement efforts today need to focus on the business elements of deal making as opposed to the sales elements of deal making. What's the consequence? What's the cost? Well, how does that apply to somebody's P&L? What's the balance sheet consequence of taking that action? Where Why? Because if your business acumen superior to your competitor's business acumen, it's the game behind the game, right? De-risking is a massive part of that talk track. Like, people don't want to take risk right now. People, especially if you sell to big companies, people just want safety. They want to do their job. They want to clock off at 5:30. They want to go home. They want to play their men's league football on a Tuesday night, have a beer with their mates, spend time with their kids, and only work because they want to work to fund all the stuff they want to do. And I think one of the problems in our industry and sort of startup SaaS is we're all hyper ambitious, hyper focused people, and we just assume that everybody wants the same things out of their careers that we do. Selling growth is awesome because I can sell growth to Mick, Mick can sell growth to me. It's why technology bubbles are so pervasive. Like, why is everybody down at the moment? Well, because every software company in the world that we would sell all of our kit to, nobody's buying our kit anymore. Right. So we've created a market which is self-fulfilling. I can sell some Amazon Cloud to Zscaler. Zscaler can sell some DevOps to me. I can sell some ConnectAndSell to MongoDB, whatever. And then all of a sudden they get rid of their seats. Compound annual growth, which predicates all of our business models, goes out the window. And then you're like, oh my God, how do I get this through an actual business evaluation? As opposed to being, yeah, this looks good. My mate over here did it. And that's the reality that we're facing now. So yeah, you just got to take people to a place of safety, I think. That's the responsibility that we've got now. And when you get to a certain age, your dreams expire. I know that sounds awful, but for so many people, deep psychology, their dreams just expire once they hit a certain threshold.
Yeah.
Like, I just came back from holiday a week ago, and I said to my friends, I was like, I'm so sick of working for a living, but I need to work for a living in order to stop working. That's the deep and bitter irony of it. They're like, well, I'd play golf and I'd be happy doing it. And everybody goes, no, you'd be bored. And I'm like, no, that's just the justification we give ourselves for continuing to work and not like leveraging our dreams as you get to become an adult. People just give up.
Yeah.
So risk matters more and more because 98% of the people just think in terms of safety.
Yeah. And I think de-risking is such a key element now in any sales process. I don't think if you're not proactively attempting to de-risk the deal, then the likelihood is, you're going to have slippage or, something's going to happen to that deal. Talk a little bit about that and how it is you can introduce the element of reducing risk. There are many different tactics people deploy, but what are you seeing work well?
I think it's just confronting why people would assume that there's risk in the first place. So being able to lean into that question, I think in growth propositions, it's always an assumptive close, right? This makes sense, right? Not why wouldn't you do this, right? So you've kind of got to factor that in. I think you need to be aware of the people behind the deal that aren't in the deal with you. I think there's a huge amount in that. I think the other thing is tactically, you just need to find sort of a compromise which is commercially attractive to you still, whilst at the same time not pushing for the big deal. I think at the moment, if you were to look at most people's order books in software, the volume of 6-month proof of concept that sits on people's order book right now is the highest it's ever been for a long time. And that's absolutely okay. I don't have a problem with that, provided it's prepaid. And then just sort of flexing around potential opt-outs, breakouts, and contract cancellation terms that are viable and fair.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing some people ask for some spectacularly stupid stuff. Like somebody was like, well, if I can't make the technology work in 8 weeks, and we're like, well, generally that's going to be predicated on a whole bunch of infrastructure things that are out of our control, like your CRM instance, your telephony, your office environment,
Yeah.
How do we define that as a sensible opt-out? It's almost impossible. So you're like, well, I can't define that as a sensible opt-out. I'm not going to put that into the contract. So maybe we just walk away from the deal.
Yeah.
Have you found yourself walking away from deals?
Yeah, a lot more. I think the biggest frustration for me and a lot of peers, and I'm not sure if you guys have seen this across your network or even in your own business, is actually people just not sticking to contract. That's been the big thing for me in 2023, is the fact that people just don't seem to bloody well pay their bills or find ways to try and weasel out of the deal that they did with you without accepting the fact that it's in talk, it's contract, it's legal. And nobody wants to be held to account on the fact that they signed paper with you. And like, you can hold people really accountable, but in a small market like the UK, you've got to be really worried about what the reputational consequence of that is, because one of my favorite sayings that my dad used to tell me is that the truth always catches up to a lie, but it's always about 14 steps behind. Right. So you might take an action which is packed full of commercial integrity and sincerity, but somebody can still go into the market, ruin you on G2, tell their entire network about you, and then you've got 14 days to catch up on the lie and then overcome the reputational damage. So you've always got to consider, is like holding people to account on this contract worth it, or do you just take a D-book and go again?
Yeah.
And you're put in a really unfair position there because you did the work. You excommunicated the value out of them. You absolutely built a narrative of sound commercial reasoning. They've taken a bet, and now you're responsible for the fact that their business environment has changed. That's not fair to vendors right now. And I think a lot of customers, especially if software propositions, are asking their business partners in the vendors to be their banks, to hold their investments, to put on pause. Like, whenever anyone asks for a pause from me, I'm like, well, what's the rationale behind it? Are you asking Salesforce for a pause? Are you asking LinkedIn for a pause? Are you asking, no, why us? Oh, you're the most expensive thing that we pay for. Well, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to retain the goodwill, and it's a really delicate balancing act, kind of thing, that people are finding themselves dealing with at the moment. So a lot of people might report really strong ARR this year, but actually net present value is probably going to be the number one determiner of whether or not software companies survive or thrive. Have they actually got the cash to reinvest? They might bucket load of order bookings. And here's the real point that I'm making here, is how many of your sales reps actually understand that, are capable of having that conversation. So if you can just start teaching parables on why your deal constructs matter so much, guess what? All of a sudden their business acumen flies through the roof. So they can start having these conversations externally with customers.
Yeah, I don't think you get told any of this when you join a sales team, business mechanics and all of this. Like, especially when you've been promoted from an SDR role, like you've been asked to like do 6,000 activities a day, and as I say, like almost stupidly sticking to the number. And you're also trying to get hold of CEOs who are on a very tight P&L, trying to speak about profit margins and cost of sales and all of that. And the disconnect is so big. Have you found
It's not a fair job either. I think that's the other thing. It's just not a fair job for a lot of people to take on. Like, hardly anyone can thrive in a commercially aware sales development environment in 2023. I don't.
Yeah, I'm grateful for this podcast because we get to be exposed to a lot of departments, like leaders from different departments, RevOps, customer success, and like I learned so much on every.
Right.
I thought I knew a lot. Then I
We don't know much.
I didn't know anything about this.
Yeah, I've got an example. I was in Seattle a few weeks ago for the Outreach conference, and that's where our CEO Chris Beall lives. And I went out for dinner with him and our CTO Hitesh, who I'd never met in 4 years of working at ConnectAndSell face to face. I had nothing to offer at dinner. I literally just sat there and just soaked everything up that these two exceptionally wise old men were saying, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
And just to have like that 60 minutes of just like, just such a phenomenal experience. And, you know, I think, again, in this kind of market, you've got real opportunity to go out and level up constantly with podcasts like yours and other things. So, you know, everyone's got an opportunity to take control of their own careers in 2023 without being reliant on their employers to define that work for them. And if you want to become more business savvy and learn how to de-risk deals, super, right? You just go and read the Jolt Effect. You read the FT every single day. You get news alerts on all your key customers, and you listen to as much long-form podcast content as you can. And all of a sudden, you could potentially hit another experience level within 6 months of that process that would normally take you 24 months if you just relied on your enablement team at your mid-market software company to you up. So there's an awful lot of individual autonomy available to people right now and how they develop this skill set, Hitesh, that I just don't think that people really think through unless they really want to do this job.
How do you detect that when you hire someone, that this is someone who's going to focus on self-development and autonomously go and
it's quite hard, isn't it? Like, there's a little bit of stuff. Like, we'll use something called Objective Management Group, which I guess you probably used when you got hired at Outreach, right? We use it as sort of a predictive sales assessment as part of our hiring process. And in that, they've got a really interesting metric, which is desire to sell. It's called the will to sell quotient. Know that if people have got a will to sell, there's a real good reason for wanting to do that. People that have got a really strong desire to sell have got goals mapped. They're able to articulate what those goals look like. But you also know that they're inherently curious and they're going to seek time and wisdom from community, or they're going to be self-centered around reading and getting better at their job. We've got a pretty good sales team at ConnectAndSell, but I can tell immediately why the top 4 performers every single year in the 4 years that I've been in the business are the top 4. They take time to go out and really educate themselves on things. They identify shifts. They're not scared to test talk tracks. They'll ask for book recommendations. They'll share insights from various WhatsApp groups that they all belong to. They'll bring forward certain things. I actually think that I'm not really big on the sort of DEI stuff because I'm a meritocratic dude at heart, but I had 2 reps when I was CRO at Ava.ai, and one dude was completely like failing to invest in himself. I used to set like these little, not homework projects because that's patronizing, but we used to do like these book clubs and stuff. And like set aside some time for one-on-ones and go, what did you learn from the book? And you just fudge it, and you could tell that he'd Googled somebody else's book report.
You read the Cliff Notes.
And then Drew, she was incredible. Like, she would literally write these academic book reports for me and like really go hard, have these awesome questions. They started at exactly the same time, but within 6 months, Drew was up there and the other guy, who I won't name, was all the way down there. Right? Why? She was just seeking active information so that she could become better at her job, and she was inherently curious and spirited by that curiosity. So yeah, and I don't know if you can teach that. You just can't.
Yeah, I don't think you can.
You've either got it or you haven't.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree as well. You said something earlier on in one of the questions we asked Top about email and kind of the state of it currently. What kind of role do you see email playing moving forward, in particular within the top of the funnel? as part of generating meetings.
I think the real sort of alpha play for sales demand moving forward is around sort of channel activation rather than it being like multi-channel. So theoretically, the two things are sort of similar, right? Multi-channel is trying to get people across all channels to identify what channel they care about.
Yeah.
I think it's had a really big negative impact because it's almost like saying, I'm going into battle against something and I'm going to tell them where I am all of the time. And that's going to give them the strategic advantage not to meet me anywhere. You know, if I leave voicemail from a phone number, they can dodge you forever and a day, right? So why voicemail at all? If I say I left you a voicemail in email, well, now they can just easily move your email to spam, right? You're kind of saying, here I am, come at me. Cold business development, whether it's defined as marketing or sales, has one thing going for it, which is it's supposed to be a surprise. You're supposed to catch people in an ambush. You're supposed to create curiosity. You're not actually supposed to create false relationships or engagements because that lacks sincerity.
Yeah.
So I think email still has a play, but once you've identified whether or not that's somewhere where the prospect lives and prefers to be communicated with, you know, I narrow it to a choice, knowing that that's now a safe space for me to communicate with that person because that's what's safe for them, rather than making an assumption. So anytime you try and thread messaging together, I think you lose the law of diminishing return to each and every single next step, which is why I think some of the sequencing giants are failing out a little bit and changing their product narratives.
Yeah.
They've got to deal with very complex issues around deliverability. That's probably worthy of a PhD or a specialization in its own. And I want to set up a cold email shop right now because like the cost and understanding of delivering is well beyond my core understanding.
Yeah.
I also think that trust is predicated on conversation 98% of the time. Like there's probably a reason why dating in 2024, 2023, 2022 really hard is because it's just hidden behind asynchronous digital interactions where people were making judgment and value calls about you before they've even met you.
Yeah.
That's tough. Whereas if you just have the balls to go up to that desired other person in a pub and start a conversation, you might fail, but guess what? You've gone out and you've shown that you care a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's a very different thing. And that's why I've always liked calling, even when it wasn't fashionable, is because I believe that for me, I'm always going to be able to execute there better because I just have a natural ability to go out and start conversations with strangers. But I also get it on the other side of the spectrum where there's a much more introverted type of sales rep coming into the industry now. And they might not necessarily have the psychological capability to go and do that, but they could still be incredible at their job in creating value. But it's a different way to start a conversation. And it for them probably feels like a more natural way. Like I'm right at the cusp of Gen X millennial. I'm like 1981, depending on how you define it. So I grew up in a world where going up to strangers was totally normal and encouraged.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to leverage that. I think email is interesting. I think WhatsApp's quite an interesting community to play with, especially first conversation. I get a huge amount done in WhatsApp now. Text message as well. I get a huge amount done in like curated Slack communities and dark social. So I'm not diminishing the value. I just think that the invasion of the inbox feels really, really bad from a buyer perspective right now. So you better have the world's best email.
Yeah.
And
that's really hard because I think people just want to automate that work as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, then more and more technologies also now to plug in multiple mailboxes. So
I don't want to be a hypocrite here, right? One of the best ever big time enterprise deals I ever did started using email to start that whole process off. So I know it can be hyper effective, but I had the luxury back in the day of being a full cycle rep, and I literally spent 4 days researching that email. I wouldn't have the luxury or the time to do that because my first line sales management in 2023 would be like, did you hit your activity quota? Outreach is showing that you didn't do much here today, mate. It's just a different thing, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there's a couple of things you said there which are particularly interesting. So obviously how effective that email strategy is. So, you know, people's inboxes are just like peppered with emails now, right? So it's very difficult to stand out. But it was the piece you said around the introverted salesperson, right? And I think that's something that particularly interests me. So I'm not an introvert myself, but I look at other people that I know who are, and perhaps they started their sales career when things were going really well. You know, you could afford to be a little bit more of an order taker depending on the type of business you're in versus now. And now they're being asked, hey, actually, you need to be a 360 rep. So, you know, you need to not only sell or close, but you need to source as well. So what kind of strategies or tips do you have for people who are of that nature? Maybe they're not comfortable picking up the phone, you know, and how can they get over that hurdle?
It's to be really unfashionable, but get a tin hat might be one of my best bits of advice to anybody. Like, get some armor, get some flak, get a bulletproof vest, because you're going to have to go into places as a professional seller which are uncomfortable and unnatural for you.
Yeah.
Especially in down markets, you kind of need to put in that extra phone call to that person that might not have been in the deal if everyone's gone dark on you. That's an unnatural act. It's actually an unnatural act to sell, by the way. Most people are taught from the age of like 4 to not be pushy, to be polite, to not engage in curiosity, to sit back and listen and not interrupt and do the things that you sometimes need to do to assert your value and contradict people's belief systems and teach and educate people on a different way of doing things. So inherently, the nature of selling is unnatural. How do you make cold calling easier? You rely heavily on scripting. I'm a genuine believer in that. Like, for a range of strategic reasons, not just because it's controlling the rep. It's about strategy and execution and message consistency and prospect understanding of your value, etc. I think the other thing is constant real-time enablement around the effort that people apply to that, which isn't a sales manager job, it's a coach job, and it's a dedicated resource probably in a business of a certain size. I think reward the behaviors that you want out of people. There's an element attached to that. And if even after that, you've created a culture where you're trying to make it as easy and as safe as somebody for it to execute, if they still find it a real struggle, you've got to understand deeper why that is. But at the same time, you don't want to marginalize somebody who could be successful elsewhere. And perhaps this points to the future of where sales development specialization goes. Identify a channel and put the right rep in the right channel rather than expecting them to do all facets of the job. There might be an email rep, there might be a calling rep, there might be a social rep. You never know, right? How you balance that load, especially if you're doing a really good job of validating channel where you don't need somebody to go wide and broad across all channels, but you've already got that information in front of the rep and you know that of these 100 emails, they're accurate, they're responsive, it's preferred channel for that customer. You could do a huge lot of that potentially.
Yeah. We've stopped sending email altogether. It's just not, the juice is just not worth the squeeze. Like, you were calling first and LinkedIn.
So conversation first is interesting. One of my customers is doing something really good, and they've basically had to pause using ConnectAndSell recently because they've got a bottleneck in a different place now, which is, I guess, a good reason to put us on pause. But what they were doing was they were just using the cold call to say, hey, we've never met before. We've discovered a breakthrough, which is really interesting and helping support peers in industry around these 3 challenges. I don't want to try and get you to sit a meeting with me or anything stupid like that today, but I just wanted to see whether or not I could send you an email and following the email, see if you'd be open to a conversation with us in 2 weeks' time. So honestly, sensational. So they were measuring email acceptance as a coming out of the conversation. They were then measuring the email click through, and then they were basically just following up on people that had picked up the phone to them previously that they'd sent the email to. And then they were converting on that second call at like 40% to a discovery meeting. It was insane. Wow. Email still has a really interesting play, because don't forget, in cold calling, you're ambushing somebody, you're asking them to take time away from a task that they were active in already. You're a complete stranger. Psychologically, that's weird for them. You know, you're going to have 1 of 3 reactions: fight, flight, fright. So I quite like how they positioned that play, because they saw cold calling for something comprehensively different, which was, this is just an ad unit, and it's a targeted ad unit. It's probably a more precise, more scalable ad unit than pay-per-click or an Instagram ad or a LinkedIn ad will ever be. I can then put some real estate in their inbox against a validated email address. I can make my subject line today's conversation, which leads to a higher open rate on the email. And then we kind of said in the cold call, we were going to call you up to talk about the emails. So now that we've caught your attention in 2 channels combined and activated both of them, that third conversation is then about conversions.
Which is strong, it's really good.
It's really smart, right? Really smart.
Were they putting them into a sequence, an email sequence or a cadence, or it's just a standalone email?
Yeah, like they would literally spend 1 day a week, 3 people, cold call using ConnectAndSell. So what's that? 40 to 50 conversations per person.
Yeah.
150 emails potentially compounded against the team of 3. Standardized email, but it was coming from one, like Mick's inbox, Hitesh's inbox, Gerry's inbox. Well below that 50 a day automation limit. So you're probably going to run into a lot of the spam issues and stuff. It's still measurable if you're just using something basic like Yesware to measure whether or not it hit somebody's inbox. Yeah. And you've already got like, yeah, they picked up the phone. Yeah, we sent the email. Yeah, we've got a right to call them back. So It didn't require automation particularly. It just required good list structure.
Very good. Very good.
Maybe you don't want to share this, Gerry. I would understand, but how do you do this at ConnectAndSell? Because you're obviously like leaders in that cold calling, like email, phone call industry. What's the ratio between email and calls you guys do?
Email typically comes after conversations with virtually all of our team, whether sales directors or internal sales guys. Our inside sales guys are very different. We believe in sales development as a profession, not a career progression. Most of our ISRs are late 30s through to late 50s in age profile. They kind of don't really have a huge amount of ambition to go and get a quote carrying job beyond the job that they do. They're really good at their job. They've kind of got really mature, soulful, mid-tone voices, virtually all of them. So they're not coming on strong like a puppy. It's just a grown-up. Like, you'd never hang up on your grandmother, would you, if she called you? You just no matter how busy you are. And that's kind of like the psychology behind it. They get aligned into one of sort of 3 strategic plays. We've got these lists that we call pools. So they're shared territories. 3 or 4 SDRs will call on one list. And then just simply allocate like bottom and mid-market opportunities out to reps on a round robin basis. Then we've got some more strategic plays, like we might have a Cloud 1000 list or a cyber list or a private equity sponsored company list or whatever it might be. 3 or 4 of the more experienced reps will work those rep lists once or twice a week and allocate to the appropriate reps that own those initiatives. And then basically anything that comes down funnel from that would be an email we'll send me some more information. They'll have all of that stuff orchestrated for them. And then that'll just all go into follow-up activity inside of ConnectAndSell. They also get like queued up on lists around missed meetings. So any meetings that they sit, I go into Salesforce at the end of the week, basically report on all my meeting stuff. Did it happen? Didn't it happen? Why didn't it happen? That immediately goes back into ConnectAndSell. And once a week, they'll call missed meetings and rebook people that didn't show up for first calls.
Yeah.
So you're basically weaponizing 4 or 5 different list strategies. They have no control over that. All of the work, the lists, the prep, the research, everything else is controlled by a central function in our business. And they just simply turn up, log in, execute all day long for 4.5 hours, log off, and then go home and enjoy their week. Right. So they don't have any sort of outside pressures. They don't have to go to Zoom Info. They don't have to go to Lucia. They don't have to go and research. They just have got these really intelligent scripts built for them, and they just execute for 4.5 hours.
Very, very, very productive.
So it's an industrialization approach, and it doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but it works for us and what we're trying to achieve. So
yeah, makes sense. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about as well, because I've seen the technology, right? It's great tool. How much call coaching do you do as part of that process? How much efficiency, or maybe efficiency is not the right word, but how much better are you able to make people through that coaching of the calls?
Yeah, significantly, I think is the answer. Because you get to coach in one of 3 dimensions. One, real time. So you can do active coaching, peer-to-peer. We'll often pull like an ISR out. We'll be with the head of that team or our on-staff coach. They'll listen into live sessions. They'll come up with a list of like 10 things that they heard across the hour where they weren't calling themselves.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Back to the team. They've also got the opportunity inside of ConnectAndSell to ask for coaching on specific calls, and that will flag back. And then they've got the opportunity to go back and do individual or group call review. And then every single AE that they set for gets an opportunity to listen to each and every single one of their cold calls prior to the meeting. We've got these sort of meeting alert notifications. And if there's anything that sounds a bit off, they can get like one-to-ones with their AEs as well. So there's 4 different ways that they can get continual feedback. And likewise, our AEs are on a 40 conversation a week mandate. So, you know, they are also being very proactive about seeking out sort of coaching opportunities. They have to do one of those coaching blitz sessions once a week on a Monday. So the whole team sits down together and calls together. And, you know, I'm in that, SVP's in that, and our on-staff coach, Eric Martinez, is in that. So everybody's listening. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, not everyone likes it. You know, there's certain companies that don't think that the visibility and accountability component of that type of visibility works for them. Well, it's 2023, you can't really listen into people's calls anymore. I'm like, well, that's the number one job that you have as a first line sales leader, is to help your team get better. So without evidence, you make that happen. Because most sellers are going to be like one or two. I'm rubbish at this, or I'm good at this. Most are going to be in the most like, I'm good at this camp. How often do people who lack that level of self-awareness go and actually seek out help from people? It's rare.
Yeah.
So you need to be proactive there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, again, I think there's something you're not being taught how to do, like actual coaching of calls and actual coaching and development of salespeople. How do you put that enablement framework in place to start with, Gerry? Like coaching coaches, basically.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a lot of it is sort of organic and cultural. You know, if the people in your business at the top of your business set the tone for that, then it permeates through everything you do. If you don't emphasize the importance of improvement, then you never find frameworks to make it better, or you'll spend a lot of money trying to get somebody from the outside to do the work for you. You know, we can often tell who a good customer would be in our business, and it would be the same for somebody at Gong or a Fract or a Lego or any other businesses that have got an emphasis on coaching the products that they sell, which is how much of the time was spent by those executives going back through the call recordings or listening or commenting or adding conversational context to that note or whatever it was. Like, if they're not doing that in the pilot, they're never going to do it when they roll out. So immediately you've got compromised ROI.
Yeah.
And then obviously, as an engine of accountability, sometimes we need to tell our customers where they're drifting, and that can be an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
I've got a private equity-backed business I work with at the moment where the CRO was screaming at everyone, why is our North American business failing in comparison to our European business? And we looked across everything. Messaging was standardized, markets were standardized, lists were standardized, ICP was standardized. And actually, there was such a big addressable market, none of that stuff had a massive impact. But we went in and looked at recordings listened to by first line managers, and the North American team was at like 1 hour in 6 months. And the European team was about 6 hours a week for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
So that's more of like is it like an adoption thing or just not following a framework?
You guys sell to sales leaders. I'm about to say something really obnoxious, but true here. Everybody thinks they've got the fucking answers.
Yeah.
I don't need your help. I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
That's the biggest issue when you sell to salespeople. Everybody's got big enough likability, but big enough ego that they don't think they need help most of the time. And it's a legacy from a long time ago, but it still permeates in our industry. And if somebody wants to be the sales leader that spends their time in spreadsheets rather than doing their job, which is helping their reps get better or removing the reasons why they fail at their job, guess what they're naturally going to do? And the trouble is, for a lot of them, is that with new tools and the adoption of tools and the viability of how many different sales technologies in the world there are, 7,000 to 8,000 now, David Delaney, they can't hide anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a natural tension that exists between like the spreadsheet leader versus the active leader who wants to help their rep get better at their job because they understand what that means for the business.
Yeah. You know, you spoke about yield and productivity to start with. Like, how do I get more out of my employees, basically? And I think there's two ways to do it. Either you give them a new skill set, or you teach them a new skill set, or you give them a new technology that makes them more productive. But what I'm really surprised by is the amount of C-level execs was just blunt about the fact that they don't actually care whether people are struggling or not, and the level of yield. Like, we've got this almost on a weekly basis. Hey, you could be twice as productive as you are. Hey, I pay them a salary. They deal with it. That's not my problem. As long as they get to the target, that's what I'm looking at. Do you come across this kind of behavior, Gerry, as well?
Sometimes. I mean, I try to be quite optimistic most of the time, although I see a lot of stuff that I would recognize as bad behavior. But I generally put most bad behavior down to one or two things: actual incompetence. It's never like willful. People don't mean to be bad at anything. Like, I genuinely believe that, unless they've got a very toxic agenda attached to it. And then the other one is people just don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be sympathetic to that. And I get a bit frustrated sometimes when you hear people go, "Oh, the customer's an idiot." No, the customer's not an idiot. You just know more about a problem set than they do. And that's something that frustrates. And you kind of see it play out in a lot of people's sales processes when you start using your own acronyms and stuff in front of people that hardly know what you do or what you are.
Yeah.
Real sense that as a business and as a vendor, you're probably a little bit arrogant about how you go about solving the problem. But it doesn't come from actual arrogance. It just comes from our culture is so confident in what we do. And I think sometimes that's one of the biggest elements of transformational change whenever you sell something to somebody, is just trying to sort of strip back any of the really complex elements of that, which is generally language for 98% of the people that you meet, and then just helping them understand where in a maturity framework they exist today. And it's okay for them to be at 0 if it's a 5-step maturity framework, but so long as you concede the idea that there's an opportunity for growth, either at a personal, professional, career level, or an outcome, which is the business problem you're trying to solve for, you're in a good place. And actually, that's been one of the biggest things that we've implemented in the past 4 months, is this idea of maturity curve, helping people benchmark and model where they are today so that they can willfully and intentionally get better at the coaching side of the job. Because that was one of the elite high maturity kind of benchmarks, is I coach consistently every day my reps on how they're performing using ConnectAndSell, for example.
But you've got sport. So your background in sports, I think you're kind of wired to think this way.
A little bit. I also think sport's a bit of a myth, actually. And I think sometimes in sales, the analogy is a bit overused.
You've just killed my brand here, Gerry.
No, but think about
That's what I've got.
Think about this. Like, even in team sports in long seasons, let's use football, soccer, rugby as an example. Teams aren't necessarily wired to perform at peak from day one of a season.
Yeah.
The other thing about athletes is that whilst they demonstrate high resilience and durability, they actually are quite needy. They perform when they get hugs and pats on the back, and there's always tangible awards. And then the reality is people in sport don't play to be competitive. They play to be winners and to be dominant. Like, everybody in sport's trying to formulate a monopoly for a certain amount of time. So, yeah, sports makes sense because of the competition elements, and it makes sense because people are generally wired to want to be better at something. But actually, there's also a very high attraction to neediness, and it doesn't necessarily always work out if, like, you want to hire athletes, for example. So you need to be very, very cautious about that.
Yeah, make your
generally they do succeed. Like, I'm not trying to underplay it, but I also think we've over-indexed it for so long.
I agree.
I like military people, actually, because they're taught to perform every single day. You can't be bad at your job once in the military. You just can't.
Yeah.
Whereas in the context of a 24-game rugby season, I can have 2 or 3 performances in a season where I'm 7 out of 10.
Yeah. Well, someone else said that to me as well. Somebody, I can't remember who it is, but they started a business where they recruit, it's a recruitment company, sorry, and they only serve people who are like ex-military or ex-services, as an example, putting them predominantly into commercial roles as well for that very reason. they're more regimented, they're able to follow process as well, and then consistently have.
Like with any of these lateral hires into software sales, there's always going to be a performance gap around a characteristic, and you just need to be willing to identify that and coach against it. Like a military person's going to be high discipline, they'll execute on the activity, they're easy to work with, they'll inspire through performance, but at the same time, there are going to be certain elements of the job that make them really suited to military, but not sales, which is probably being high extrovert and some of the other stuff that you might need to be at times.
Yeah.
So are they supportive of your effort, or are they key to your effort? Like, it's just playing chess, isn't it? Constantly.
Yeah.
Like, there's no template or pro forma for any of this stuff. It's just good ideas and then trying to apply them in your own environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gerry, it's been a pleasure to have you on. We do have a little bit of a closing tradition in terms of a question. And the question is, throughout your whole career to date, what is your favorite memory and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people obviously reflect on their wins quite a lot, but it's actually the peer stuff. It's like when your colleagues recognize you for being good at your job. Your bosses, it's so situational and momentary in sales. Like, everybody's had down years, everybody's had good years. And even in the face of when things are a little bit rough and raw, people turn around to other people in your business and say, no, Gerry's still like, or you want the best advice on this problem, go and speak to Matt Forbes, like, or whatever it might be. So it's just those little high respect moments that matter the most.
Yeah.
One of my happiest moments was I had a really good run at Frost & Sullivan, which was an advisory company, kind of similar to Gartner, but in different industries, so like environment and water and infrastructure type stuff, not IT specifically. They were closing down their main office in Victoria. All the alumni got asked back to go there for a party and stuff. And one of the principals, so one of the partners in the business, turned around to somebody new at Frost while we were having a drink, and he went, I loved working with Gerry because it was like working with one of the actual consultants. It was never like working with one of the salespeople.
Nice.
And that was it. That was that moment of respect, ushered through the halls, still got a bit of a reputation, even though I haven't been there for 14 years. And the memory that I left that colleague was that, I was a fairly high quality professional. It wasn't just that I was setting numbers on fire.
Yeah. Amazing. Awesome. Well, look, Gerry, once again, absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast. Until next time, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, guys.